when I started to do some research for this webinar was the presence of clinical expertise in CROs in the APAC region. We all know that that most trials require experienced and qualified CROs to do their studies. And the APAC CRO market was valued at $7.6 billion in 2021 and is forecast to reach $25 billion by 2025, according to one estimate that I saw. And that's just huge growth. I mean, we're talking about 4 years and a growth of about $17.5 billion. All of the top 10 global CROs seem to have a presence there, including IQVIA, Parexel, Icon, Syneos, and Covance. And I'm just wondering, how big a factor is that for companies wanting to conduct trials in that region? And Brad, I'll go ahead and start with you. I know your company is located in Australia, so you probably don't often have to go out and do a search for CROs there, but for companies wanting to do trials there, is that a big concern for them generally?
Yeah, hi Ed. Thanks very much for inviting me, and it's great to be on the panel with Michael and Sarah as well. It's interesting when you ask this question because I start off thinking about our prior experience of looking for CRO partners. And I have to say the presence of global CROs wasn't something of huge importance. And I think that was just merely because we knew who most of the players were within the Australian market. Now, if you were to ask me the same question about us moving into South Korea or Japan or China, then having that name recognition of a global CRO, I think would be much more important. It would give us a lot more stability, a lot more understanding that they know what they're doing, that they've been there for a number of years, and that they're bigger. Now, of course, if we're talking about doing a multi-country or a multi-jurisdictional study or even a registrational study, then having access to a global CRO with staff on the ground is going to be vitally important. But like most people on this panel, I'm sure you'd be aware, there is some great people working at smaller independent CROs as well. And those independent CROs may specialize in either certain regions, certain indications, or certain types of modalities of treatment. So one example within the APAC region, and this company's done a great job of branding themselves as an APAC specialist, is Novatech. Now, I've never worked with Novatech, but I just know from their branding that they very much focus on the Asia Pacific region, offices in all the major companies. So yeah, definitely make sure that you're focusing on a CRO that's got good cultural fit, that delivers the services that you need, but you're having access to global CROs, if you're not aware of all of the companies within that region, is obviously a great first step.
And Sarah, again, I realize CROs are not your area of expertise, but we know companies want their products in those APAC countries. And to do that, it seems like you have to conduct trials there. Does that in and of itself drive the need for competent CROs in those countries?
Yes, Ed, I think that you are right. Because of clinical trials is a basis for the outcome of clinical trials and the conduct of clinical trials from the GCP perspective, huge importance for regulatory authorities, believing those data and bringing products to market. So the need of quality data sort of drives quality CROs in those countries on how to operate within that environment, as my colleague Brett has said, knowing the culture, the expertise, the standards care, and the language and everything else, I think it's a huge driver for that. So again, yeah, absolutely, regulatory need is also driving a good quality CROs available in the APAC region.
And Michael, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, and I think that in going into each of these countries, want to be aware of the differences in standard of care. That has a lot to do with local knowledge as well. So, for instance, in Taiwan, Japan, China, even in India and Singapore, sponsors are expected to pay for the standard of care with very few exceptions there. So in the construct of the trials, it's really important to have a clear on-the-ground understanding of what you're going to be up against, and making sure that you can operate within those both cultural as well as practice standards, and that has huge impact on budgets.
Yeah. Maybe, Ed, if you don't mind adding to that, in terms of when we talk about CROs, maybe conduct of clinical studies, but before we conduct a clinical study, oftentimes we have a regulatory consultation in those countries, right? And then in terms of the standard care, protocol design, endpoint design, and then those essences, number of these CROs have a regulatory capabilities, also understanding those local regulatory elements, and then really guide you through designing a great study and then executing and then ultimately leading. So for me, I think oftentimes we think in clinical research organization is more on the conducting the research, but for me, I think they're also instrument part of building that regulatory development strategy in that country and then liaising with health authorities in those countries as well.